founder of Grassroots North Shore, member of the steering committee, and scourge to bad politicians everywhere. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's online meeting. As you know, the massive 2024 elections are less than a year away, and we will need everyone's help to deliver Wisconsin for Joe Biden and save American democracy. So here's one important way for us to do it. Elections are won or lost based on person-to-person voter engagement. And tonight, nationally known messaging expert David Pepper will join us to help us be better messengers on important issues to our friends, our family, our coworkers, when we knock doors and make phone calls. That is what Tom Hartman refers to as winning the water cooler wars. So we will, David will be talking to us about what resonates and what succeeds. You'll want to pay attention and maybe take a few notes. Our Grassroots North Shore co-chair and Fair Maps fighter, Debbie Patel, will moderate the evening, opening with the interview of David Pepper. We will then hear from State Senate Minority Leader Melissa Agard about state issues and finish up with Mandela Barnes, friend of Grassroots North Shore and currently president with Power to the Polls. Grassroots North Shore co-chair Cheryl Morano will provide the closing remarks. And one more thing, you'll want to attend our annual fundraiser on February 4th, allowing us to see you early next year, and you're going to be seeing a lot of us after that. And as usual, we will have some fascinating issues to discuss. So now on with the program, and take it away, Debbie.
Thanks so much, Keith. Thank you so much for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to do a couple of more housekeeping matters. This meeting is packed with information, and so as Keith said, you might want to take some notes. We will also be sending out the video so that you can watch it in rerun if you want, and you'll be able to share it with your friends and family. We'll also give you some links to websites and other resources. We have three special guests. You already heard about David Pepper, and you know, I think when you registered or before you registered, you learned that he is traveling. He's in California. He really wanted to work this out. We finally said, quit trying, David. And so we recorded an interview with questions that we got from our future audience members. Then we turned to State Senate Minority Leader Melissa Agard. People also sent questions to her, and so she will be working them into her remarks. And then we close with Mandela Barnes, who always inspires. So first, David Pepper. He's a lawyer. He writes political thrillers. He is a painter, and he's an amazing democracy activist. He's got two books that are must-reads. The first one, 2021, well, two books about activism. In 2021, he came out with Laboratories of Autocracy, which Salon magazine said was arguably the most important book about democracy, the recent book about democracy. Then in 2023, he came out with his sequel, Saving Democracy. It's a user's manual. It's an activist playbook, and seriously, that one should be on your bookshelf. David's a regular on MSNBC, CNN, C-SPAN, other places, so you may recognize him. So I'm going to turn it over now I'm going to click my share button, and we're going to watch the interview with David Pepper. So bear with me for a minute. And here we go. The first question is, we're talking about messaging for 2024 so that the Democrats can win in 2024. What do you think the best message is for re-electing Joe Biden? What are the talking points that we should not only say to others, but say to ourselves over and over and over again so they're at the tips of our tongue? What do you think, David?
I'll go back. I actually thought a lot of what he did in the State of the Union speech was very good. It was very sort of core economic issues, other issues, and I think he had some fight to him in a way that was really good. So he delivered the message well. I mean, one thing I try and emphasize in my books is often Democrats lately are allowing Republicans to make us think that we're somehow reflecting the minority in our viewpoints, that we're the ones who are extreme. It's the opposite. When we push for a woman's right to choose, when we push for public schools, when we push for collective bargaining or middle class based economics or, common sense gun reform, we're with the vast majority of Americans. They're the extremists, whether it's Trump, whether it's Jim Jordan or Matt Gaetz or whoever the person du jour of is at the House, whether it's your Republican state house or ours, banning abortion, no exceptions. Never forget that they're the extremists. They really are. And that's not a partisan thing to say, although it sounds partisan. The polling tells us that. Many of their issues are literally supported by 30, 20, 10% of Americans. And so I think we take what we're doing that lift everyday Americans, we got to message that better clearly, but contrast it to their extremism. You know, the crazy shenanigans we hear from Trump every day, the election denialism, the Dobbs world that they're giving so many of these states. I think that contrast is actually very powerful. The other thing I'd say in states, now this is not as relevant for Wisconsin, so I won't spend much time on it. But in my books, I do spend time on the fact that, and you lived this until you won your governor's race. In the states that they control, they are spending most of their time taking public assets in dollars and forking them over to private players. That's what your state house does every day. They're rewarded for doing that because they're gerrymandered. They don't worry about the voters. They worry about their donors. Their donors can hold them accountable. The voters can't. So when it comes to actually focusing on those types of politicians, like your Republicans in the state house, which we need to run against every one of them, and like our Republicans in our state house, I focus on the fact that for the most part, they're not serving the public at all. And in many states, their outcomes are horrible. You know, in Ohio, we were ranked 5th in the nation 15 years ago or 12 years ago in the quality of our public schools. We're now in the mid-20s. Some states have 4 days of school a week. There's other states, small towns are dying because they don't support them and they don't support infrastructure there. Young people are flocking and leaving many of these places. So I'd also focus on the terrible outcomes that come from their policies that we too often don't get into. And boy, if I had the outcomes that they had, and if I was extreme as they were, I'd love it that we never talk about those things. It's a gift when they're the ones who are ruining schools in places like Ohio. They're the ones that are letting small towns atrophy by not supporting them, by trickle-down economics. We've got to be smarter about showing that their mode of governing in all these states are literally driving outcomes through the basement, way down in state after state. And my guess is there's a lot to talk about there with the Wisconsin State House, even though by having a governor, you're stopping some of that. The MO of these state houses is basically corruption of public service. It's giving away public assets to the private players who support them. That's how all these places work. And the results follow that very broken model.
And so what I hear from that too, because we do see that at the national level, that the Republicans, you know, love trickle down economics. They like to give tax breaks to the rich, that kind of thing. And so what Joe Biden has done is he has invested in infrastructure and invested in things that help, you know, the middle class. So getting back to the Biden and Trump race, something that just amazes me, and I'm sure it amazes you, and we're told not to spend too much time looking at the polls, but it amazes me that we hear this comment. I think of it as we hear like, oh, yeah, well, Trump has done some bad things, but Joe Biden is old, right? Well, he's old. Right. Or we hear what I call false equivalence, like, well, what about Hunter Biden? And how do we get around that sort of thing, that the two presidential candidates are seen as somehow equivalent?
I just think we have to just be on our message. It's going to be close. I think that in the end, though, Trump is so extreme. I mean, his behavior, you know, and you and I are talking within a couple of weeks of what happened in Israel, and his behavior where he's name dropping Orban, but doesn't even know what country he's from. He said things about Hamas and Hezbollah that were very strange. I think those are all going to catch up to him. We need to talk about them, but I think those will catch up to him. I think our number one thing right now is though point out their extremism on things that really affect everyday people in their lives. And that is Dobbs. And that is the world we will have if, Jim Jordan supported a national abortion ban. We know that. We don't know at this point who the speaker will be, but my guess is you'll have between that speaker and Trump, you'll have people who are really, really in very unpopular positions when it comes to post-Dobbs. So I would again go back to, there's going to be a back and forth. The media is going to do that. But I think to break through there, get to the issues that everyday folks are concerned about. And in the last year, one reason we have a winning streak for democracy in Wisconsin in April, in Ohio, hopefully this November, but we know in August, is because Dobbs really woke people up. The reason they are attacking democracy, and this is something we all have to make sure we say clearly, don't just have a battle over democracy sort of itself, although we all care about it at 30,000 feet. The reason they are attacking democracy, there's a reason for it. It's because they want to impose a worldview that most of us don't want.
Right.
And so it's not just to attack democracy in and of itself, although that's a problem. It's to lock in a world of Dobbs, of abortion bans everywhere, when the people don't support that. So always make the connection back to the issues that everyday people actually in their lives in a nonpartisan way think about. That sit around table and are concerned about. In some places, that will be the fact that schools are being just crushed by the right-wing stuff. In other cases, it'll be Dobbs. So make the connection back to those issues. And I think that's how, if you break through on those issues, because those are all the issues that were, the broader federal stuff was percolating going into 22, but we won all over, including every election and I are running for Secretary of State, and the swing state lost, because people saw their extremism for what it was, and they saw that if they're allowed to be extremists when it comes to democracy, we all will have a world of Dobbs going forward. So I think those types of issues kind of cut through the back and forth. And on those issues, Joe Biden, the State House Democratic candidates, the Democratic governors, the Democratic Senate candidates, we're going to be on the right side of those issues versus them. They are stuck. People do not like book banning. They support unions. They support a woman's right to choose. We are on the winning side of all those issues. And so get to those issues and just keep. Mehmet Oz, what happened to Mehmet Oz? Why did he lose? He explained that he thought a woman's choice should come down to her doctor, and the local elected official. Remember that?
Right. Yeah, I do.
That was the day he lost that campaign. He
Right.
simply explained his view. So we have to get them in the position of simply explaining to the voters that they have these very toxic positions. And I think all of a sudden, when someone thinks, oh my gosh, I have no right to choose going forward, whether or not Joe Biden or Donald Trump, whoever's older, whoever seems, that's going to be less important than people's core rights in their lives.
Sure. I do think one thing that it reminded me is when Joe Biden went to visit the union that was on strike. And then Donald Trump said that he was going to support the workers, but he went to a non-union house and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's really good advice. Some of us have heard that in other meetings where to argue that, democracy is becoming more popular to try to say, but the democracy is sort of the recipe for what everybody wants. We think of it as, people want the brownie, that's good public schools, that's healthcare, all that kind of stuff. So that's really
Yes.
good advice to focus on the issues.
And without democracy, they get to impose a world that most Americans do not want. And they have to gerrymander. They have to change rules.
Right.
They have to ignore laws sometimes, because otherwise what they want to have done would never be accepted.
Right.
And so there's really there's the positive. We can get great things done if we have it. The negative is if they succeed in undermining sovereign democracy, they impose a worldview that most Americans simply don't want. Explain that, and that's when we really start to make progress. Right.
I agree. That's really good advice. I was in an Uber in Chicago last week, and you mentioned the House of Representatives. And she had the news on or something, and I basically said, wow, what a mess in the House of Representatives. Because as you mentioned, right now, I think we're at week 3 now without a Speaker of the House. And she said, I said, it's just like, I can't believe the Republicans can't, get a speaker. And she said, I don't trust any of them. The Republicans, the Democrats, they're all the same. So you hear that sometimes, and I wasn't going to argue with my Uber driver, but we also hear that people are exhausted by politics and they'd rather just stay home because they're just tired. What do you do to activate? I mean, you have a huge following, you activate a lot of people to do things. What message do you give people that activates them to want to come out and vote, go out and canvass, that kind of thing?
Well, a couple things. Even though we all watch it, don't spend all your time watching and worrying about the Republican primary debates or even the speaker fight. You have no control over that. None. And don't convince yourself, although Wisconsin benefits from this and Ohio had for a long time, don't think the only battle is over federal swing states for Senate races. You're on the front. I don't care if you're in Oklahoma, where 60% of Republican legislators were uncontested, or you're in New York, where voter turnout was too low, which led to George Santos. Everywhere in America, I don't care where you are on the front line of the battle for democracy. Every school board race right now in America is a frontline battle. Do we have book banners on school boards and history censors, or do we have people who live in public schools? So the way I'm motivated to say you're on the front line and focus on the things that you can make a difference on, like those school board races or like your Wisconsin Supreme Court race in April, whatever. And once we remove this very sort of bad narrative that it's only about a few federal races. The Koch brothers love that we think it's only about a few Senate races while they're owning state houses. That is literally a gift to them. That, I'm in a state without a federal swing state race. I guess I can't do anything this year. They love that we think that. So once we see that we're in a battle for democracy at the state level, not only are the stakes motivating, I hope, my God, we got to get involved, but then you realize you're on the front line. And everything you do every day, registering voters and supporting candidates, running everywhere, matters in that battle for democracy. Whether or not, we win a seat in Georgia or Pennsylvania somewhere, that also matters. But what you do for that local school board race in the next couple of weeks, again, we're speaking for the election, whether or not we win those really matters. If we win Virginia State House, it really matters. So you're on the front line, and you can spend all your time on something that you control versus watching a Washington where we control almost nothing.
And what I'm hearing a couple of things here. First of all, I love it. It's God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage to change those that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that's very good advice. Many of us just kind of sit and watch the same national news repeated over and over and over again until you can hardly stand it. But so I like that the focus on what you can change. But the other message that I'm hearing is that all politics is local, right? So get involved locally, and when you're involved locally, you will automatically be involved nationally, right?
Yeah.
And if you get your friends to care locally, then they will be involved both locally and nationally. So let me
put it this way: local politics is now national.
That's true.
It's the inverse. The good news is, by focusing local, you can actually win.
Right.
With incremental amounts that you may throw some money at a U.S. Senate race, drop in the bucket. It might really help that state house candidate by far more back in your town in Wisconsin. But winning that state house seat is part of the national picture. Winning a school board seat is part of the national picture. The Koch brothers, the moms of liberty, that's how they see it. And we're catching up, but we're not where they are yet. We have to see that it's local, but the national impact now, when their front line of attacking democracy is get book banners on school boards, win state houses and gerrymander them, on and on and on. It is the front line now. And my hope is, again, when you see it that way, you realize the news shows all repeat the same story hours. And I admit I watched some of them, but every hour you spend doing that is an hour you could be engaging voters to show up, could be helping someone run in a tough district, maybe run yourself, on and on and on. So use your time accordingly. The other thing I'd say about what we do, and I go through this in this book, Saving Democracy, have a timetable in your mind of what activity when makes a difference. If all we do is get it energized in, the final month, but we take 11 months off or 23 months off, while Steve Bannon is working those entire 23 months, we're losing ground. So early in the year, and the activity changes depending on where you live, that's when you could be engaging voters. If you're on the board of a nonprofit, a food bank or homeless shelter, that's when you can convince that homeless shelter to register voters that they serve, or the food bank. So there's the engagement time, then there's the recruiting and supporting time, then there's a get out the vote or early vote time. So have in your mind the schedule, because once you're in a battle for democracy, you realize, oh, that's full time. I mean,
Right.
Obviously you're balancing it with other aspects of your life, but it's not a sporadic involvement. Just like the suffragists didn't stop working, just like John Lewis didn't only gear towards an election cycle. And so have a schedule in your mind of all the activity that may look different in January and February than it does in the summer and fall. And if you do it gradually, I think you can make much more of a difference than sort of the spurts and stops that we go through today.
The one thing that we are doing in Wisconsin is that we basically have never stopped canvassing. We just keep canvassing and engaging voters. And in doing that, we also engage our volunteers.
Yeah.
So let's talk third parties and independent candidates, because we had a couple of questions on this. How worried are you about no labels, which is, becoming a political party? Robert Kennedy Jr. or Cornel West, both of whom plan to run as independents. What are your thoughts on that?
If anyone has ever, and I'm sure no one on this call has, read my second book called The Wingman, fiction, you'd know I'm worried about it, because the entire plot, I wrote it like 5 years ago.
Okay, I'm going to read it. Go ahead.
It was big money, dark money, using spoiler candidates to change the outcome. And yeah, it worries me. I mean, it worries me because of states like Wisconsin that are close. And so and now we see that this Harlan Crow, who seems to be part of everything bad, one of these right-wing donors, has given money to Cornel West. I think it's a difficult time politically. Even the potential, and we'll see what's happening when the time this airs, potential ground war in the Middle East. People have very strong views about that in many different directions. And so you throw in a bunch of candidates, and we might, some candidates will draw some Trump votes. Some candidates will draw some Biden votes. We know it's mixed. I don't want to overstate that it's all coming from Biden. My worry is the Cornel West votes are largely coming from Biden. The Kennedy votes may be coming from both, although he'll draw maybe on some Democrats. Maybe the no labels candidate there is one is pulling more from Trump. But overall, I actually think a pure rematch between Biden and Trump, I actually feel good about. I actually think that pure rematch, there are people who I think have figured out how bad Trump is and won't vote for him. And I worry that those other candidates that take away from that pure rematch net generally hurts Biden more than it does Trump. We'll see. So, again, I can't control that, but I would say to people, don't be fooled by this stuff and think it's good faith and start signing petitions to get these folks on the ballot. The more we have a pure, straight up election between Biden and Trump, I think the better off we are to win. So it worries me, but it doesn't slow me down from saying what we need to do. Recruit in every district in Wisconsin, spend every day engaging voters, all that. But yes, it's a concern. And the more you see these big money players, I think they know that Trump is very damaged goods. Let me walk through it a second. Trump in 2016, although we all knew he was off the charts in dangerous ways, his message to small towns in places like Ohio, Wisconsin, that they've been ignored and they need more attention, actually appealed to people. In 2020, he struggled because COVID made it a lot harder, but he had some message. In 2024, his message is literally, I won the election in 2020 and I'm your retribution. This is a terrible general election candidate in 2024. I think he is a much worse, forget my judgment of him as a person. I think as a candidate, he is a much worse candidate with a bizarre and twisted message that I think a lot of voters are going to say, you're a retribution. You didn't lose in 20. What are you even talking about? So I think he's actually a very flawed general election candidate. I think he's probably the worst candidate in their primary running for the general. I think he actually would do worse. So that's why I say I think a Biden-Trump matchup, Trump is so flawed. You don't take nothing for granted. But I think the reason the far right billionaires are putting money into third-party candidates is because they realize that Trump is a really flawed general election candidate. Because just watch his daily rantings. I mean, they're bizarre. He's going to be prosecuted all next year. And so I think they realize if they don't figure out a way to get votes taken away from Biden through helping Cornel West, helping, Kennedy or whatever, I think they fear that Trump's going to cost them another election. That's the second election in 4 years.
So you seem a little less worried about no labels than I might have thought, because they've got tons of money. You think is it like, and I guess what I mostly hear is that they're gonna pull the dissatisfied Biden voter.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not happy about any of them.
Yeah, okay.
But in the center, I think arguably they may be more of a wash. It depends on who they would pick. And okay. I'm not convinced, but Cornel West
right
is not pulling from, I don't think pulling from Trump voters.
Right.
Maybe some. You never know how these things fall in weird ways.
Okay.
Kennedy is, he's an anti-vax. He's off, he's got a lot of conspiracy theories. He may pull from some Trump voters, but the name Kennedy should worry us that he gets some Democrats.
Okay.
No labels is more in the middle in a way that maybe, so I would almost rank them in that order, but none of them, all of them worry me. A straight Biden-Trump matchup
is what we need.
Yeah. And of course, if there was a libertarian running to the right of Trump, then that would be the other end of the spectrum. But I worry that especially, in the same way we saw in 2016 with blanking her name now,
Jill Stein.
Yeah, Jill Stein. That clearly took from, and that's my fear on the Cornel West versus someone in the middle. But no, it's all, especially when you realize that it's like everything else. They do not want to have a straight up battle on their view versus ours. They want to avoid a Trump election denialism, extremist competition against a mainstream Joe Biden. They want to avoid that at all costs, just like they want to gerrymander, just like they want to change the rules in Ohio to make it 60%, to change the Constitution. So they're putting big money into all the candidates they think would disrupt what would otherwise be a straight up decision. Do you go with Trump extremism and election denialism, or do you go with a mainstream Democrat? They're working feverishly to keep that from happening because, again, as we said at the very beginning, they know that most of the views and most of their extremist, instincts are actually very unpopular and will generally lose on election day, as we've seen play out for a year now across America.
So before we move on, which book was it? Give me the name, because it's one I need to read.
Oh, it's called The Wingman.
Wingman.
And it was like I don't write my fiction novels to come true, but they keep coming true. And the wingman is literally, not to give it away, the wingman is the character that is put into a race to siphon votes away from the favorite that the big dollar people don't like. And that's the plot. And that's literally, I wrote that in 2018. And that's literally what clearly this is. And they've already done that to some degree. In Florida, we've had congressional level races where they already did this. And that's led to some indictments. But yeah, the plot of the book is, big dollar people, they know they would lose. So they throw other candidates into the mix to siphon votes away. And when you see that Harlan Crow and other big money people making investments into, no labels, Kennedy, and now Cornel West, it's obvious that they see that I think they think they need it to win. I think they think Trump is such a disastrous candidate. Now, we don't take nothing for granted, but I think they do not trust that they can win the Biden-Trump matchup, so they need to interfere with that from being the matchup.
Sure. I think we have time for one more question, which I'm going to combine two questions here. And it's about some hot topic hot button topics that, you know, the Democrats, when we vote, we're sort of like a broad, we have a big tent. We're a broad coalition. And so now what we've seen in the the conflict in the Middle East, is that we have people all over the board in terms of how they feel about that issue.
Yeah.
Another one is immigration, where, you know, we also have people like, oh, the border should be absolutely open, or we need more restrictions. So do you have any thoughts on how we navigate and keep this big tent, this big coalition together in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I'll be honest, I think that's a huge challenge right now. I mean, it is, as we said, I think before we got on, it's a really difficult time in the country and the world. And nerves are frayed. I mean, terrible things are happening. And we don't control all those things. And I mean, I think on the one side, having a true grown-up in the White House like Joe Biden versus Trump, there's a message there. I mean, who would you rather have responding to these major crises? Someone who's been around a long time and is seasoned to deal with it, or someone who is babbling at this point? At the same time, the effort to, you know, respond responsibly to just an egregious terrorist attack, but also the need to follow human rights and respect, you know, families and kids not being caught up in the response. That's a balancing act that you can easily alienate all sorts of parts of our coalition. And in certain states, that's actually, you know, politically a real challenge. So I trust that you know, and the other problem is you don't want to respond to major crises with your finger in the air of politics either. You also have to do the right thing. All of that, I think, is a real issue and a concern amid very, very high tension moments. And you and I don't know right now as we're talking what's going to happen in the coming weeks. I mean, a ground war could be coming, and a ground war in the 21st century where it's covered daily is a really horrible thing. We've seen it with Ukraine now for 2 years. It's horrible in so many ways. So, I mean, in the end, I don't think there's an easy answer. I think we need to keep working hard to see the bigger picture contrast. But I know one thing for absolute sure, that I'd rather have a grown-up with experience on major issues leading our country than someone whose relationships with everyone from Vladimir Putin to Kim Jong-il I don't even understand, whose instincts are horrible, who brings out the worst in people, and who I think is clearly very corrupt. I'd rather, you know, it's not a close call there. And so as much as things are bad and challenging, if we do it right, it may also underscore why you'd rather have someone who's a true grown-up, be adult in the room, and a team of adults in the room versus Donald Trump, Mike Flynn, what's his name? I can't even remember all these people, like Miller. I mean, Stephen Miller. Yeah,
Stephen
I mean,
Miller,
you
right.
want to have Anthony Blinken and Donald Trump. Anthony Blinken and Joe Biden and all that leadership team, or do you want to have someone, you know, the old Super Friends show when I was a kid, or do you want to have the Legion of Doom running the show? Like that's the choice, folks. And so I think that as tense as it is, and as much as there are frayed nerves and people not agreeing perfectly with every response, at some point the choice is really clear. And you project onto the current world situation, and you put Trump in the chair in the Oval Office versus Biden, who knows what we would be hearing and where we'd be going. It's scary to think about.
Yeah,
I mean, we have literally Trump saying that he wants to get out of NATO. We've got, I mean, it's just getting more and more insane by the day. And let's keep grown-ups running the show and not, you know, again, the Legion of Doom.
Yeah, I love that advice, because it also counters the question about Biden's age, right? So what you're talking about is a grown-up with experience versus the, you know, the chaos king, right? So,
right.
And everybody knows that Trump is the chaos king. So we're stopping the interview there. We went on to talk a little bit more about Ohio politics. It was a very fun experience, and I was glad to get to hear it again, and I hope that you all enjoyed it. The main takeaway as I listened to it again that I kept hearing David go back to over and over again, well, a couple of things, the serenity prayer, which we all need, and then the concept that the Republicans from the top down, they offer a world that America doesn't want, right? So if we point out who's right on the issues, and the things that really matter, it's really important. I will say this interview was taped October 24, and we do now have a speaker in the House. I'm not a big fan, but we have one. And then David Pepper and his gang really showed him in Ohio, and they were the Republicans were showed all over for what they are all over the country. So next up, we have State Senate Minority Leader Melissa Agard. In 2012, she was elected to the Assembly. And then she is currently the senator for the 16th Senate District. That is Eastern Dane County. It includes part of Madison. In 2022, Melissa became State Senate Minority Leader. Questions were sent to her, and so I'm going to turn the floor over to her, and she will weave those questions into her presentation. And I don't see it quite on camera, but maybe we'll get a picture of the four. We'll be able to see the four. Yeah, there it is. She, in addition to doing other things, she is raising 4 boys, and we get to see their footprints or their fingerprints behind her. Take it away, Melissa. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and thanks for everyone taking time out of their very busy lives as we're getting ready for another week. And it's certainly going to be an interesting week in the Capitol building here in Wisconsin. This is our last week of legislative floor periods before 2024. And there's an awful lot going through the Capitol building. But one thing that is really clear to me, and I think to most people that are spending time in the Capitol building, whether they're elected officials or lobbyists or citizens, and I'm sure that it is on your minds as well, is this redistricting case that the Supreme Court is taking up, and they'll start hearing oral arguments the week of the 20th. So just a week away from that happening. And ultimately, I think everything that I'm going to be talking about tonight is really framed with the fact that here in Wisconsin, folks are starting, after the elections in April, starting to feel something that we haven't felt in over a decade. And it's a simple 4-letter word. It's hope. We know that in the state of Wisconsin, that, Democrats have been coming to work every day for an awful long time and not be able to get things done. And when I was first elected to legislature, it was because, all we wanted to do was tax and spend. And in Wisconsin, that's what the Republicans would say, to pivot away. Well, now we have a $7 billion surplus as we started this budget process. We didn't spend that down. We're back up to a $7 billion surplus and a very healthy rainy day reserve fund at the same time. And when you take the economics out of the equation, and certainly economics matter, and it's vitally important that we have balanced budgets and that we're wise with the money that we have, we are also able to talk about the moral issues, the issues that people are grappling with at their kitchen tables on a nightly basis, or every day with their families. And we know in Wisconsin, and this is not just in Wisconsin, but in fact it's across our nation, that Democrats are working for the good people of our communities, regardless of who it is that they're voting for at the top of the ticket. And we know this because the issues that we continue hearing as drumbeats in our conversations, whether it's people reaching out to our offices or when we're watching elections in other states, as we did last week, and the results, or thinking back to Justice Protasiewicz's elections, or even the elections in Wisconsin when Governor Evers and Josh Kaul won re-election to their positions. That things that Republicans have typically said, on their literature with their talking points, that are Democratic issues, are in fact issues that are pulling people regardless of party affiliation. So abortion care, We saw that last week in elections across our nation. We saw that with Justice Protasewicz. People are turning out and they're voting to maintain access of abortion care. Last Friday, actually, I served breakfast to veterans here in Madison. And you never know what the conversations are going to be like early in the morning as you're pouring coffee into people's cups. But it was stunning to me that these men, it was vast majority of them, I would say 90% were men, many of them in their 70s and 80s. And they were thanking me for being on the front lines and fighting for access to abortion care in the state of Wisconsin. Additionally, voter access. My Republican colleagues in Wisconsin and across the nation continue to sing a song that our elections are not fair, they're not safe, and they're not secure, but they're not questioning the results of their own elections. We know that in Wisconsin and across our nation that we do have safe, secure, and fair elections, and supporting our election clerks and quieting the chaos in those stories is vitally important. We know that childcare funding and access to comprehensive childcare is something that matters to folks regardless of party affiliation. And again, it's the Democrats that are pushing that forward and the Republicans that are refusing to have that conversation. LGBTQ rights, conversion bans, and interfering with healthcare for trans individuals, standing in the way of marriage equality. There is one party that is fighting for that, regardless of who it is that people are voting for at the top of the ticket. And there is another one who is literally taking virtue signaling policies up the food chain and daring Governor Evers and other governors across our nation to veto those policies. Gun safety. We all know that we have an epidemic, a public health epidemic in our nation and here in Wisconsin, and that the vast majority of people, including gun owners and Republicans, support gun reforms to ensure that no matter where it is you are, whether you're working or you're playing, you're recreating, you're with your children, that you are safe and that they are safe. And unfortunately, we're moving backwards in Wisconsin and many, many states across our nation. Something that I have been pretty outspoken about, cannabis legalization, is another one. We're an island of prohibition. Ohio last week became the 24th state in the nation. Over 50% of our country lives in responsible adult usage states. And we are literally one of 6 of the most restrictive states. And it is not good for the safety of our communities or our kids or our prosperity or our personal liberties. And the majority of Republicans agree with that, but we're not able to get that to move forward. Medicaid expansion. Wisconsin is one of 10 states that has not yet expanded Medicaid. Red states and blue states across our nation have done that. It would increase healthcare coverage for 90,000 people roughly in the state of Wisconsin. It would provide healthcare coverage to many people that don't have it. It would increase affordability, and we would be bringing in billions of dollars from the federal government if we just expanded healthcare. It is a morally corrupt thing that we are not addressing that in Wisconsin. And again, it's not a partisan issue anywhere but in the Capitol building. Water quality, whether it's PFAS or lead or nitrates. You live in Milwaukee, you live in rural Wisconsin, you live in a small town. Water quality is vitally important. Water is life at the end of the day. We all know that to be the case. And it is the Republicans that are standing in the way of being able to have comprehensive protections for our water and air in the state of Wisconsin and protecting our natural spaces. And again, regardless of who it is that you vote for at the top of the ticket, Wisconsinites value this, but it is Democrats in Wisconsin that are fighting for this and the Republicans who are standing in the way. Drug affordability, universal meals in our schools, or even digging down to the fact that 35,000 people in Wisconsin that happen to work for the University of Wisconsin system are not getting their wage increases that were voted for by the budget that was crafted by the Republicans because Robin Vos is standing in the way. So at the end of the day, one of the questions that was asked of me to touch on is, if we get our messaging right, are the Republicans in the legislature who can be persuaded to vote with us? And I've set up the stage here to say Republicans in Wisconsin care very much about these moral issues. They are not Democratic issues or Republican issues. They are Wisconsin values and frankly values of people across our state. But our Republicans that serve in the legislature right now in Wisconsin are so used to getting their way. They have had the deck stacked. They have all the toys in their toy box and they have not had to share. But with the redistricting hearing coming before the Supreme Court, the case coming before the Supreme Court, we're seeing chaos in the Capitol building because they don't know what it means to actually negotiate, to be gritty, to sit down and have conversations with people and try to get to a better place. And Democrats are working every day in order to make that happen. So ultimately, we are really depending on the fact that we're going to have 33 Senate seats up for re-election in 2024. And of course, all 99 assembly seats are always up every election cycle. This will provide us the opportunity to actually have Republican legislators that will be listening to the voices of their constituents, the good people of Wisconsin, who ultimately are the bosses of everyone who is elected in that Capitol, and making sure that we get many of these things done, as we have seen happen in Minnesota and Michigan when they had fair maps and they were able to actually move forward with legislative policies that mattered most to the people within their communities. And, you know, I am grateful every single day that we have Governor Evers here as a stopgap, but he needs good partners in the legislature. And it's the same thing with President Biden in Washington, D.C. He needs not only a good partner in Governor Evers, but he needs state legislators across this nation to be able to have his back. And he has been a pragmatic leader who is thoughtful in moving forward and really cares about our nation and the future. He cares about our kids and college affordability, cares about our environment. He cares about reproductive freedoms, and he cares about the power of unions within our nation. And he has been on the front lines with that. But the rhetoric of the media being hungry to pick up stories that cause chaos, that is more exciting for people to read than a story of something that is actually working. And that gets to be something that is challenging for us as lawmakers, especially those of us that are in the minority, to be able to lift up the good that is happening in the communities, because ultimately the first thing that is said by the reporters when we want to sit down and chat with them is, well, are the Republicans on board? And my answer is Republicans in Wisconsin are on board, but Republican legislators are not. And we need to continue telling these stories because this is what matters most to people at their kitchen tables. This is how it is that we move forward. As a state, we need to be compassionate. We need to lift each other up, and we can't have preconceived notions about who is going to do what or who isn't going to do what. Asking the question of why in conversations with our friends and families across the state and frankly across the nation will get us more to a point of being able to collaborate and see the good in one another and be able to solve these real problems that exist that majority parties that have created their majority through gerrymandering are preventing us from being able to get done. So we do know in Wisconsin that now with the redistricting case and the fact that Governor Evers was elected to a second term and Justice Protasiewicz is now in the courts, that there is that chaos in the Capitol building, and Republicans in the legislature led by Devin LeMahieu and Robin Boss have access to blank checks. And when they don't like an answer, when they don't like what it is that is being proposed, their easy button that they're pushing is to file a lawsuit and slow things down. And we know that ultimately, you know, the courts are one of our three and very important three branches of government, and that they're a backstop. And we're so grateful to have a Supreme Court in Wisconsin that is far more fair and balanced than what it was before. But this is your tax dollars and my tax dollars that are being spent so that the Republicans can continue to stir chaos. And we need to know that through these conversations, the fact that there is this money being spent by the majority party in the Capitol building, and I say that loosely because we know also that Democrats are actually representing the majority of the people in Wisconsin, even though we have the title of minority party. But that the Republicans ultimately do have louder voices because they have access to that money. They have access to those powerful lawyers. And they have the ability to push through policies that, frankly, they know that the governor is going to veto, but the press continues to write about them. So here, what we're doing right now to get ready for 2024 as Democrats in the legislature is moving all over the state of Wisconsin and meeting with people who are interested in running for office, who are interested in supporting people who are running for office, because we don't know if we're going to have these 33 districts up for reelection, even what the lines are going to look like in those 33 districts. So recruiting candidates, that's a big part of the job that I have, aside from supporting my candidates, is recruiting the candidates and raising the money, is we're having to do that in a creative way. And sitting down with people who are interested in potentially running or supporting folks who are running for office, and having really high level conversations about what it is that is most important to them, and making sure that we are educating them and getting them ready, so that in 2024, after the Supreme Court decision is made, that we are ready to go, and that we have all our ducks in a row at that point in time. And it's a little bit like bumping around in a dark room, as you can imagine. Legislative maps matter, the district lines matter when you're recruiting people, but it is so heartfelt to see how many people are raising their hands and saying, I want to make sure, even if this district isn't going to be a district that is competitive, that there is a Democrat running there so that people have an alternative to the Republican who is on the ballot, and that these down ballot races in the legislature can help turn out people to vote for Senator Baldwin's reelection and the reelection of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And we know that we all do better when we have candidates on the ballot in every seat possible. So we're working very, very hard on that. And we are grateful to have the partnerships of good people across the state of Wisconsin, like all of you, who care so much and are asking the questions about what is it going to look like next year, and how is it that we can get ready to help, and how do we elevate the message that needs to happen. But at the end of the day, we know that in Wisconsin, we have a heritage of helping each other when we were starting to build barns, or opening our very first kindergartens, or having the very first Earth Day, that in Wisconsin, that we do better when we see each other and have that compassion as really the uniting force between these conversations, and how it is that we continue to move forward, not just for us today, but also for our kids in the future, and for future generations. Because right now in Wisconsin, we're out migrating so many of our young people. My oldest son now lives in Brooklyn, New York, as opposed to Wisconsin. And a big part of it is because of the liberties that he has in New York that he does not have here in Wisconsin. And I'm hopeful that we as a government and as a state can write that, so that we become an in-migration state, so that our kids are coming home. Because we do better when we have a younger workforce, and we have people who are putting their roots down here in the state of Wisconsin. And, someday we'll be running for the office that I hold, and continuing to push us forward as a state, where dreams matter, and where we see each other, and where we realize that it's not about what letter is next to someone's name, but really the morality of the issue that we're talking about, and how it is that we solve it so that our state is more fair, and more just, and more safe, and more secure for everyone that is here. And that means also being able to see each other for the benefits of who we are. So whether we live in Milwaukee, or in Wood County, or in Platteville, small, medium, large communities across the state of Wisconsin, that we realize that diversity of our state and the strength of all of us is what helps move us all forward, as opposed to the seeds of that have been planted that divide. And that is something that our former President Trump has done, and Governor Walker here in Wisconsin did as well. And it's not a matter of what I have and you don't, what I get and what you don't get, but really what it is that in the end helps Wisconsin be better and lift one another up. So we know in Wisconsin that what it is that Democrats are working for is really what matters to people at their tables. And I think the last question that on my list is really about Democratic Party spending time on culture wars and ignoring other parts of the country. Well, certainly I'm a state legislator, so I can focus on the state of Wisconsin. And, when I look at that list that I led off on at the beginning, I guess someone could say, these are our culture war issues: abortion, LGBTQ rights, guns, cannabis, clean air and clean water. But what I know is that these are the issues that matter most to the people of Wisconsin, even the majority of Republicans. And I don't see them as culture war issues so much as being able to separate what it is that Democrats are actually working for versus what Republicans are working against. Because we know in Wisconsin that when we see each other, that we do better. And as is inscribed on the ceiling of the governor's conference room, that the will of the people shall be the law of the land. And right now, the majority party is not listening to the will of the people, and it is not becoming the law of the land. And that's what Democrats in Wisconsin and across our nation, led by President Biden and Governor Evers, are working for every single day. And that's why I know you guys are giving up part of your Sunday evening to be able to engage in these conversations. So I am just tickled that I was able to spend some time with you all tonight and share a little bit of the story of what Democratic legislators in Wisconsin are doing now and what it is that we're planning on doing as we continue to move forward into the very, very important election year of 2024. Debbie, I'm going to throw it back to you. And again, folks can reach out to me if they do have any questions or they have follow-up. I'm very available via social media or through contact in my office.
Thank you, Melissa. That was really informative and inspiring to me. And I did write some notes that I'm going to say before we turn it over to Mandela. One thing that you said, Melissa, that I was really pleased with is that you're working hard to get people to run in every district. And even if the maps don't go our way, I think that's really critical because I know David Pepper talked about this concept as well, that it really helps with the up ballot. And I know when someone asked me in 2018 if a certain candidate would win, and I said, it's how you define winning. Okay, so I think there's a lot to that. The other thing I heard you say is that there's so much that we use this in messaging in the past about what I call the freedom frame, the freedom to control our own bodies and our families, the freedom to be who we are, the freedom to be safe in our communities. There's so much, again, that the Democrats do. That we do the things that the people want. So I really appreciate those remarks. So on to our last guest, Mandela Barnes. And there's a lot I could say about Mandela, but you didn't come to hear me talk about Mandela. You came to hear him talk. So I'll make it brief. He's a native Wisconsinite. He served in the Wisconsin legislature until he became the 45th lieutenant governor. He was the state's second ever Black statewide elected official. I had to read that because that was a mouthful. And then we all know he ran a record-breaking U.S. Senate race. He came within 1 point of unseating a two-term incumbent, which was quite the feat. And it was Wisconsin's closest Senate election in 100 years. After he left that campaign, he founded the Long Run PAC, which supports diverse and groundbreaking candidates across the country. But then he returned to his organizing roots, and that's why we asked him to talk tonight. He's the president of Power to the Polls Wisconsin, that empowers Black, brown, and working class voters in Wisconsin to get them to show up for issues and to show up at the polls in every election. So Mandela, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you. I see your smiling face. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to still be involved with Grassroots North Shore, an organization I've just had a privilege of working with for so long, probably since the inception of the organization. And, the reason why my race was the closest U.S. Senate race in over 100 years in this state is because of the work that you all put in, the doors you knocked, the conversations you all had. So just want to say thank you so much. Also, I know she's probably not on anymore, but Senator Sargent is a good friend of mine, somebody who I was elected with at the same time in 2012 to the state assembly. But we are here to talk about making sure that we keep our democracy after 2024. Wisconsin's a tipping point state, as we all know, and I have no doubt that our 10 electoral votes are going to determine the next president. And that is a responsibility that none of us on this call can take lightly. And it's the main reason why I didn't just decide to take my ball and go home after my election last year. It's the reason why I'm still involved, still engaged, because there is so much at stake. And that's why I'm proud to have returned to my roots as an organizer in my role as president of Power to the Polls Wisconsin. Now, this is an organization that's focused on voter turnout and building long-term electoral power, a long-term powerful electoral force in diverse pockets of our state. Now, less than 30,000 votes. That's how close Hillary Clinton came to win in Wisconsin in 2016. It's what separated Joe Biden from Donald Trump. And it's what separated my race, 26,000 votes to be exact, just last year. Now, in 2024, we face the very real possibility that re-electing President Biden and Senator Baldwin will come down to those 30,000 votes. And that's why Power to the Polls is making sure that we secure those votes in 2024 and for years to come. And we don't do that just by showing up 3 months before the election. And this is the same strategy that Grassroots North Shore employs. Now, we're determined to invest in communities to turn out year-round. We are showing up on doors now, having conversations with people about what the Biden administration has delivered for working families. Now, we're determined to invest, like I said, and we're determined to also show voters that we care about them long before and long after we ask them to vote. And again, that's why we're already on the doors now. We're talking about the issues that matter, and we're talking about how we can continue to do the job to deliver for communities that have been left behind. And that's why we're talking about the importance of voting. And in order for us to have a truly representative government that delivers meaningful change for communities, we need communities to show up at the polls, but we need people to know why it's important to show up to the polls rather than just saying, hey, vote for candidate X, Y, or Z. We talk about things that are going on in their lives. And most importantly, we take time to ask questions. We want to know exactly what's on their mind, what they're thinking, why they may or may not vote. Now, in my new role as president of Power to the Polls, we got right to work with now Justice Janet Protasewicz in her race, but also races like the Green Bay mayor's race with my former colleague, who I was also elected with in 2012, Eric Gimrick, and my former colleague, Corey Mason, the mayor of Racine. Both of them had re-election campaigns that were tough in the primary. They were both underwater coming out of their primaries. And we were able to put over 175 organizers on the ground. These are folks who knocked on 88,000 doors, over 88,000 doors. We also sent hundreds of thousands of pieces of direct mail. We did text message campaigns, and we also did targeted mail pieces. And then we invested in digital, radio, and streaming advertisement as well. And I'm here to tell you that that work hasn't stopped. In fact, I like to think as the spring election as a springboard for the work that we're getting ready to do from now to 2024 and beyond. And recently, we've been organizing around this continued fight for democracy right in Wisconsin, whether it's demanding fair maps or whether it's advocating for equitable early vote sites in the city of Milwaukee. Now, looking ahead to next year and beyond, because the beyond part is probably the most important of it all, our program will be expanding to ensure that we deliver the messages to win the voters that could very well determine the outcome of Wisconsin. This includes direct voter contact on the doors with a goal of over 700,000 targeted doors before the 2024 election, relational organizing to enhance our direct voter contact program by breaking down any skepticism or disinformation that may be baked into communities. And we're also launching paid media to include everything from direct mail to streaming advertisements and Black radio advertisements. Our organizer training program will ensure that we're creating lasting infrastructure in the community. And then there's so much more. It's the work that I'm incredibly excited about. I consider myself honored to be a part of it, honored to have the team that I have in place over at Power to the Polls as well. We're showing up, we're reaching out to Black, brown, and working
Okay, I
And
think he's
it's
frozen.
frozen, and we'll
Yeah.
try to get back to him as soon as we can.
Yep,
In
just
the
bear
mean-
with us.
Yeah, let's give him a second to see if he can get back on. Yep,
Yep.
there he is.
Okay. Oh, man.
Mandela, you were frozen for a minute, but you're back now.
So sorry about that. So sorry about that. Do you know where I left off by any chance when I was frozen?
You were talking about how many people you were going to get out and just generally working with Black and brown and working class communities. Start about there.
Yep. So we're reaching out to Black, brown, and working class voters who all too often feel like they've been left behind by the political process. And we're showing them what their true power actually is. And that is the power of a vote, the actions that they can take at the ballot box to change their lives and the lives of people around them. We want to make sure that people are a part of this democracy. We want to make sure that people feel empowered to participate in the process. So with that, just want to say thank you all for the work that you're doing to deliver big wins here in Wisconsin, because the big wins here in Wisconsin reverberate all across the country. It's the work of grassroots organizations like Grassroots North Shore that'll continue to move the state of Wisconsin forward.
All right. Well, good evening. I'm Cheryl Moranto, and it's my pleasure to thank everyone who joined us this evening. And of course, we owe a huge thanks to our wonderful speakers, David Pepper, State Senator Melissa Agard, and Mandela Barnes. We've seen how important consistent, high-quality messaging is to advancing the cause of democracy. Our guests have armed us with an invaluable information as we prepare for the existentially critical 2024 elections. Speaking of elections, we have 4 in 2024. Our spring primary for local nonpartisan offices, including school boards, is February 24th. Our spring election for local and judicial offices and the presidential primary is April 2nd. Our fall partisan primary, which will include all races with primary challenges at the state level, so both national and state legislative races, will be August 13th. And of course, the fall general election for president and other national and state legislative offices is on November 5th. Remember, every election is important. We heard this from David Pepper. I have 2 asks of everyone on this call. First, of course, vote, and vote in every election, including that spring primary, which may not have a lot on the ballot. If you enjoy the convenience of absentee balloting, remember that you need to reapply for an absentee ballot every year. The other thing, and actually, well, equally important, is do something to help get out the vote. None of us can do everything, but every one of us can do something. And we all need to do our part. Help register voters, write postcards, canvass, phone bank, make sure that like-minded friends and family vote and that they know who's on the ballot and why it's so important. You can watch for volunteer opportunities in the Grassroots North Shore newsletter. As Nancy Pelosi says, don't agonize, organize. Everyone who registered for this event will receive a follow-up email in the next couple of days that will include a link to the video and some other resources. Please feel free to share the video with others. Last but not least, mark your calendars for our annual fundraiser, which will be on February 4th. We're very excited to announce that our featured speaker is NYU professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat. She's an expert in authoritarianism. I'm sure when she started as an academic 25 years ago, She never dreamed how urgently relevant her work on authoritarianism would be to us in our daily lives today. She's a very engaging speaker who will help us all to stay lucid. So thanks again for attending this, and good night.